Okay, so brief overview of auditory processing. So firstly, sound comes in through your outer ear and is funneled and amplified, and then it goes into your middle ear, where it goes through, kind of goes through those three ossicles, your tiny bones, your malleus, your incus, and your stapes, and those amplify and the vibrations. Um, and then there's a little muscle, they're connected to a little muscle called the stapedius, and that muscle can amplify those vibrations even more because it kind of vibrates as the bones vibrate. The thing is that muscle is innervated by nerve 7, your facial nerve. So if you have facial nerve injury, then basically that can damage that muscle and you can become like really sensitive to loud noises. Anyway, then you have your inner ear, which consists of your basal membrane, and it makes up a thing called the organ of Corti or Corti or something. And this basically consists of outer hair cells and inner hair cells, and here there's fluid which is called endolymph, which is rich in K plus potassium ions. So your outer hair cells and your inner hair cells, basically the point of them is they are going to kind of turn the vibrations into nerve impulses which your brain can understand. So essentially this basal membrane vibrates, and as it vibrates, it's going to firstly move the outer hair cells, and those are going to vibrate like crazy. And essentially what they can do is as they vibrate, they're active, so they can increase the vibrations even more. So they kind of amplify the vibrations. And they amplify so that their neighbors, the inner hair cells, will basically hopefully pick up those vibrations at kind of the same frequency. And then what will happen is this long hair on your inner hair cell is called the kinocilium. And as it moves, remember we said this whole thing, the endolymph is filled with fluid. So as it moves, essentially ion channels are opened up. K plus can flow inwards. And basically every time this moves, K plus flows inwards, we get a depolarization, and that turns into a nerve signal. At low frequencies, the inner hair cell is kind of going to oscillate. And at high frequencies, it's going to code that by just having a continuous impulse. And basically these cells project onto fibers called auditory nerve fibers. So type 1 connect to the inner hair cells and type 2 connect to the outer hair cells. With the type 1 ones, it's just one nerve cell connects to one fiber. In the type 2, which connect to the outer hair cells, they can connect to a lot of outer hair cells, can connect to one fiber. Anyway, these fibers kind of join together, and so fibers from 1 and 2 are going to join together and make basically nerve 8, your auditory nerve. And then this nerve is going to go all the way into the brainstem, up into the brainstem, through the thalamus, and then into your auditory cortex, which is in your main cortex. So quick recap of brainstem anatomy. We have our thalamus, then we have our midbrain. The midbrain is made up of two kind of bumpy bits, two levels, called the colliculus, the superior colliculus here, and then the inferior colliculus at the bottom. You can see these little bumps. And then we have the pons, which controls breathing, and then we have the medulla, and then at the end we have like kind of like a swelling of the medulla called the olive. So this is anterior, this is posterior. Anterior swelling is called the olive. And then just underneath the olive, at the level of the medulla, we have the cochlear nuclei. And then here is the brain, the spinal cord. Okay, so first we said the kinocilium is going to kind of move and depolarize and cause a K plus influx. Then what happens is that signal is going to travel through nerve 8 into your cochlear nuclei. And this is just, we're talking about one ear just for now. So like say your left ear. So the left ear is going to travel here into your cochlear nuclei. And that's where processing can start. So basically your cochlear nuclei will divide the sounds, whether they're complex sounds or simple sounds. So if they're complex sounds, they go to the posterior, the dorsal cochlear nuclei. And if they're simple sounds, they go to your anterior cochlear nuclei. Okay. Then the nerve impulse is going to go upwards. So we're working upwards, remember. So it's going to go upwards into your olive, specifically the superior olivery nuclei. Now just because I found olives really confusing, what are they? So imagine we take a slice of here. So this is anterior, this is posterior. So we get this slice, we get anterior posterior or dorsal ventral, ventral dorsal. So ventral dorsal, anterior posterior. And at the back here we have our fourth ventricle, so our CSF. Then at the front we have our corticospinal tracts here, which will become the pyramids in the medulla. We have our dorsal column medulla meniscus here. We have our inferior cerebellar peduncle, which is the thing that connects your cerebellum to your medulla and your pons. And Finally, you can see this grey thingy here, and that is your olivery nuclei. So when you cut through here, you get these kind of grey swirly things. That is your olivery nuclei. Anyway, so your sound wave is your auditory nerve impulse is gonna go into your left superior olivery nuclei, and again, it's gonna be kind of further divided. And essentially, what can happen is there's the medial superior olive and the lateral superior olive, and these kind of can process sounds differently. So your medial superior olive can basically look at the delay between the sound wave from one ear to another. So then another thing I should mention is that at the olive, remember we said 1 and 2 is just your left ear, for example, but at your olive, you're going to get information from your other ear as well. So that's important because then your olive can use that to process stuff. So for example, it can look at the difference in time between sound waves from your left ear to your right ear, and that time can be used to work out low frequency sounds. Also, it can use so that's called the interaural time difference. It can also use something called the interaural level difference, so level for lateral, L for L, and that essentially looks at how sound waves deflect off the different shapes of your head, the levels of your head essentially, right, the height of your head, and that can be used for high frequency. So low frequency and high frequency sounds can kind of be interpreted by your olives. And as we mentioned, your other ear is going to project onto here, so you have integration. Then it's going to go up into your inferior colliculus firstly, and then your superior colliculus, and from there it's going to go into your thalamus. So your inferior colliculus has bilateral connections, meaning binaural, so is now going to contain information from both ears. And so your inferior colliculus is important for integrating different stuff, both of your ear sounds, and it's also important for descending stuff. So when your brain wants to send stuff to your brainstem, it can send it to your inferior colliculus for hearing, which is important for learning and plasticity of hearing. And then your superior colliculus helps with working out where sound is happening. So it's divided into a medial and lateral bit. So the medial bit shows sound above you, and the lateral bit is for sound underneath you. And then there's an anterior kind of bit of the superior colliculus, and that corresponds to sound anterior to you, so in front of you, and a posterior bit, a caudal bit, which corresponds to sound behind you. So that's all the superior colliculus is space. And then from the superior colliculus, it's going to go to the thalamus. And remember, the thalamus has reciprocal connections to the rest of the brain. More specifically, it's going to go to this bit here, the medial geniculate nucleus. The lateral geniculate nucleus is important for vision, and the medial geniculate nucleus is a little bump at the back, which is important for hearing. Minor point again, this can be subdivided into 3 kind of zones. The medial geniculate body we're talking about. So the ventral bit, which can process frequency and intensity. The medial bit, which looks at the relative intensity and the duration of sound. And the dorsal bit, so the very posterior bit, which can look kind of processes like complex and multisensory elements of sound. Finally, from the thalamus, reciprocal connections from your MGN all the way to your auditory cortex, which is buried in your lateral fissure, your Sylvian fissure, and that is kind of the bit that can do the really complex auditory stuff. So like if you're in a room full of people and you're chatting to one person, then your auditory cortex is putting a lot of weight. And basically, as we said, stuff, so as well as ascending from the ear all the way to your auditory cortex, stuff can also descend, so you can kind of get stuff for learning and plasticity via different pathways, so via your cortex to your thalamus, or your cortex to your colliculus, so your corticothalamic pathway and your corticocollicular pathway. And that's it.